Hi everyone, this is Ozic, your K-Edu English teacher. Welcome back to English Misunderstanding and Facts, Part 2. This is the third of many misconceptions you may have about English. In this video, I'll reveal the truth behind the myths about pronunciation. Since it's closely connected to other misconceptions, I highly recommend watching the rest of the series as well. A lot of people think pronunciation is super important, so they try to sound just like native speakers. But it's tough, right? And no matter how hard they practice, their listening doesn't really get much better. And even when they do speak, native listeners often still don't quite understand them. These are really common worries when it comes to speaking and listening. But here's the thing. Perfect native-like pronunciation is basically impossible from the start. So it's better to just accept that and let it go. Instead, we'll talk about why that happens, and more importantly, some realistic alternatives that actually work. First, let me introduce the concept of formant range when talking about pronunciation. You can think of it as frequency, even though these two are slightly different. Here, I'll just use the word frequency, which is usually divided into 3 levels in phonetics. For reference, opera singers' formant range is about 2,500 to 3,500 hertz. The thing is, English and your native language each have different frequency ranges. I'll explain this using the sentence. These pajamas are made of 100% wool. For convenience, I'll compare the pronunciation with similar Korean sounds. But remember, your own native language also has a different frequency range from English. Now let's take the last word, wool, as an example. For the average native male speaker, the frequency of wool is around 800 hertz. In Korean, the closest similar sound is about 1070 hertz. So, the English pronunciation isn't just a simple ool, it's more like oo-ool. Now here's a famous line from the movie Chicken Run. Focus on the word wool and listen carefully.
You're a wool specialist.
Let's hear it again.
You're a wool specialist.
One more time.
You're a wool specialist.
Can you hear it clearly? In the same way, you also need to pay attention to words like book, good, and look, because the pronunciation isn't easy in terms of your first language. The frequency difference between this English sound and its closest Korean equivalent is about 250 hertz. But in some cases, the difference can be around 350 hertz compared to the closest Korean sound, and that's really significant. Your native language, too, has its own frequency range that's different from English. If you are curious, ask AI and you will come to know the truth. But even if you know this and keep practicing, achieving native-like pronunciation is still very difficult. Why is that? It's because English and your native language actually use different facial muscles for pronunciation. You've probably heard advice like roll your tongue well or practice with a pen in your mouth, right?
Nope.
That's completely wrong. What you really need to do is open your mouth wide, almost like a round cave, and use facial muscles that you normally don't use much in your native language. Specifically, the sharp spot under your ear and chin, the indented middle part of your chin, and even the area between your upper and lower lips. You need to use all of these muscles a lot. Think of it this way. Imagine you usually just walk, but one day you suddenly go hiking. Your muscles hurt the next day because you used new muscles. But with steady repetition, those muscles get stronger and develop. The same thing happens with your facial muscles when practicing English sounds. By the way, here's just one example figure of the many facial muscles involved. I want to share an interview from NBC with Rebel Wilson, the Australian actress. When asked, "How is using American English?" she replied humorously, "When I spoke Australian English, it was easier because I didn't use many facial muscles. But American English uses a lot more facial muscles." Let's take a listen.
Is it hard to do like an American accent?
Yeah, because, okay, for example, when I'm talking Australian, I don't actually use much of my face muscles. I just be like, "Hi, how's it going?" Like that. But if I talk American, I go, "Hi there, how are you?" That's a lot more.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Rebel Wilson.
Next, let's look at speeches from Ban Ki-moon, the former UN Secretary General, and RM, the leader of BTS, both of which were delivered at the UN headquarters in New York. Whose pronunciation do you think is better?
It is an honor to follow in your revered footsteps. I add my voice to the many tributes.
And I'd like to begin by talking about myself. I was born in Ilsan, a city near Seoul, South Korea.
From the point of view of communication, both clearly delivered their thoughts. So, it's not about whose English is better. Now let's listen to a commencement speech at the University of Houston, Texas in 2017 by Arnold Schwarzenegger, the former governor of California, originally from Austria.
I tell you, when I read her bio, I am so proud of her. What a great immigrant. How many great contributions she makes to this university, to this state, and to this country.
How does it sound? From a communication perspective, he connected with the graduates and the audience very well, so his pronunciation isn't a problem. It's just a little different from the typical native accent we often hear in Hollywood films. Different languages use different frequency ranges and muscles. Even native speakers who have lived in your country for a long time may have a slight different accent when talking your language, because their facial muscles are still adapted to their own mother tongue, so your native language isn't easy for them either. Likewise, it's nearly impossible to get completely native-like English pronunciation with our own facial muscles, although there are some very rare exceptions. This is the very reason why English pronunciation varies depending on which native language you learned first. Even I, who started learning English early and grew up in various places overseas, still have a slight German accent mixed into my British pronunciation and American stress patterns. So, I can't claim to have a perfect New York accent. But here's the point. I've never had any real problems with communication, and even inside the US, pronunciation differs a lot depending on the region. Therefore, unless you went to an English kindergarten or studied abroad at an early age, getting perfect native-like pronunciation is nearly impossible. Trying to chase it is really just a waste of time. Instead, focus on pronouncing clearly enough to communicate and consistently practice using the right facial muscles. All you really need is to make sure your pronunciation can clearly separate words like the Korean hotdog and the English hot dog. Plus, here's one important point. Pay special attention to sounds that don't exist in your native language. That's really crucial. For example, the difference between F and P, between B and V, between S and Z, and especially between R and L. This last one is the hardest for many learners to distinguish. You probably know these two movie characters, Rocky and Loki. Their names highlight just how big the difference is between R and L. There are also lots of English word pairs where R and L completely change the meaning, like rice and lice. And you definitely don't want to make the mistake of saying, lice is our staple food. Because your listener might be horrified thinking you just said, we eat bugs as our main food. Then what's more important than pronunciation practice? It's stress, the emphasis on certain syllables. Some countries use the word accent for this, but in native English, accent usually refers to tone or overall pronunciation style, not syllable stress. So here I'll stick with the word stress. Now you probably know the following words, but do you actually know where the stress goes? Surprisingly, most people don't. And even more surprisingly, most people don't even care. These are the phonetic symbols. And this mark here is the stress mark. When you read each word with the correct stress, it sounds like this. Orange, banana, pajamas, major, university, biology, economics. This notation is called IPA, which stands for the International Phonetic Alphabet, commonly known as phonetic symbols. Now, even if you don't fully know how to read all the phonetic symbols, it's not a big problem, but you do need to pay attention to the stress marks. Even if you can't pronounce exactly like a native speaker, at least aim to get close and make sure you put in the correct stress. Because stress, just like pronunciation, is a vital tool of communication, and it's also a shared rule that speakers depend on for understanding each other. Here's an easy example of why stress is so important. Minute. With the stress on the first syllable is the noun you already know. But, minute, with the stress on the second syllable, changes both its meaning and pronunciation. The word with this stress means very precise, Let's see another example. Refuse. With the stress on the second syllable means to decline, but refuse. With the stress on the first syllable means garbage. Just like these cases, stress can completely change the meaning. So when stress is wrong or missing, it can cause misunderstanding. That's why using correct stress is like a promise for smooth communication. Now, it might be that your native language doesn't use stress, so you naturally don't pay much attention to it. But in English, stress is very important. Earlier, we saw that environment affects language. And here's a fun study that shows how environment also influences stress. French babies and German babies actually cry differently. As you can see in this chart, French babies place stress at the end, while German babies place stress at the beginning. The scientists who conducted this study say it's influenced by how dads say papa when comforting their babies. In French, the stress is on the last syllable, while in German, it's on the first. Even though Korean is a language with almost no word stress, when moms soothe their babies, they tend to put the stress on the second syllable. Maybe because of this, babies' cries often have stress toward the end of the sound. Now, think about your own language. When you comfort a baby, where is the stress in mama or papa? Is the stress in the baby's crying similar? It's a fascinating finding. You can also check IPA symbols and stress marks on many websites. And if IPA feels too hard, just click the little speaker icon to hear both pronunciation and stress. Often you'll find American stress patterns are different from British ones. So don't just memorize vocabulary, always check and practice both pronunciation and stress. Next up, let's talk about linking sounds, also called connected speech. The definition is simple. It's when the end of one word flows directly into the beginning of the next, so the words sound connected instead of separate. But don't worry, linking itself isn't hard. For example, come on, thank you, pick it up, I love you. We all say these phrases naturally with linking. There are many different rules for linking, but I'll explain just a few of the most important ones. First of all, cluster simplification. This happens when two identical consonants meet at word boundaries, and instead of pronouncing both, you usually pronounce only one. For example, short track, not short, track. Last time, not last, time. Hat trick, not hat, trick. Big glass, not big, glass. And even if the consonants aren't identical but are just similar, cluster simplification often happens too. For example, children's shoes, not children's shoes. Next day, not next day. Now listen closely to these linked sounds in a full sentence. He said if I do a hat trick, I can go out.
Last time, he said if I scored a hat trick, I'd totally be ungrounded. Last time, he said if I scored a hat trick, I'd totally be ungrounded.
Next is assimilation. This happens when a consonant sound changes to become more similar to a neighboring sound. In many cases, the final consonant of the first word seems to disappear or blend into the next one. This mostly occurs in natural spoken conversation. Especially see these last two examples. 10 bags often sounds like 10 bags. 10 cups often sounds like 10 cups. Let's listen to an example sentence. Imagine a dog owner praising their dog and then giving a command. Because of assimilation, you'll notice how the words blend together and the sounds shift naturally.
Come on. Good boy. Good boy. Go get the white paper and the pen. Come on. Good boy. Good boy. Go get the white paper and the pen.
Okay, let's look at palatalization. This happens when the tongue moves closer to the roof of the mouth to pronounce certain consonant combinations. In other words, two separate sounds blend together and create a softer chi or g type of sound. Here are some common examples. Did you often sounds like didja. Don't you often sounds like doncha. Meet you often sounds like meetcha. Get your coat often sounds like get your coat. Now, native speakers don't always pronounce them this way, but you've probably heard this kind of connected pronunciation very often in real conversations, TV shows, or movies. It's a natural feature of fast, casual speech. Let's listen twice.
Nice to meet you. Well, did you get your coat off, ma'am? Nice to meet you. Well, did you get your coat off, ma'am?
Next, let's talk about intrusion. This is another feature that shows up a lot in everyday spoken English. Intrusion happens when an extra sound slips in between words, even though it wasn't originally there in the individual words themselves. It makes speech flow more smoothly and helps connect vowel sounds. Here are some examples. Go on often sounds like go on. Do it often sounds like do it. No answer often sounds like no answer. So amazing often sounds like so amazing. These inserted sounds are very subtle, but if you listen carefully, you can definitely catch the difference. And once you start noticing them, you'll hear this kind of connected speech all the time in natural conversations. Let's listen closely.
It's still so amazing to go on a trip with you. It's still so amazing to go on a trip with you.
This time, let's look at elision. This happens when the final consonant sound at the end of a word is dropped in connected speech. It's very common in everyday conversation because it makes sentences flow faster and more smoothly. Here are some examples. Old man sounds like old man. Left back sounds like left back. Stand by sounds like stand by. Handbag sounds like handbag. It's not that speakers are being lazy, it's just a natural process in spoken English. So listen carefully and you'll hear elision all the time in fast, casual speech.
I stand by what I said, Olman. I stand by what I said, Olman.
Las. Let's look at reduction. This is when sounds become weaker or shorter in normal everyday speech. It's very common in conversation because reducing sounds makes speech smoother and faster. Here are some examples. I got it sounds like I got it. I want to go instead of I want to go. Let me know often sounds like let me know. A cup of tea sounds like a cup of tea. Fish and chips, often fish and chips. Bed and breakfast, often bed and breakfast. These reductions are not mistakes, they're just the natural rhythm of spoken English. So listen carefully and try to catch how native speakers shorten and smooth out these sounds.
A cup of tea and fish and chips, please. A cup of tea and fish and chips, please.
And don't worry, you don't have to memorize all these technical terms right now. There are many other linking sound rules, but I'll explain them step by step in the speaking lesson later. The bottom line is that English has many unique connected sounds, so we need to practice in a similar way to be able to do it ourselves. Finally, let's talk about intonation. Intonation is also called the melody of a sentence, so it's the combined changes of pitch, stress, speed, and rhythm in a phrase or sentence, and it's what expresses emotion, meaning, and intention. Simply put, intonation is the rise and fall of your voice. Whether your native language has intonation or not, you really need to pay close attention to intonation when speaking English. Here's an example. Earlier, I mentioned that stress is more important than pronunciation. Well, you can think of intonation as the collection of all those stress patterns put together. In this sentence, the stresses fall here, and that creates this type of intonation. Listen.
She majored in economics at this university.
Now, in the next sentence, if you place the stress on the word pajamas, the intonation sounds like this. Listen carefully, not only to the stress, but also to the pronunciation of the last word wool, which I explained earlier.
These pajamas are made of 100% wool.
Here, the stresses are here, and so the intonation naturally flows like this. Listen again.
She refused to answer the question.
One more time, listen and try to imitate the intonation yourself. It might feel a little awkward at first, but that's perfectly normal.
She majored in economics at this university. These pajamas are made of 100% wool. She refused to answer the question.
Remember, intonation can change depending on the situation or to add emphasis. But the really important point is this: English always has intonation. Now, do you see why your listening and speaking may have felt stuck? It's because not only your pronunciation, but also your stress, linking, and intonation are different from those of native speakers. Simply put, the English you've been using isn't quite the same as the English native speakers use. It ends up sounding like a completely different language, almost like a third alien language. That's why, no matter how hard you tried, your progress might have seemed limited. No wonder it feels frustrating and not very fun. But don't forget, your real goal is clear communication. And for that, pronunciation, stress, and intonation are key promises you make to your listener. And here's the good news. Unlike pronunciation, stress and intonation can absolutely be mastered with consistent practice. Now let's look at the TOEFL speaking scoring criteria. The score is out of 4 points, and grammar obviously matters at the 3 and 4 point levels. If you look closely, a score of 4 means there are no major problems with pronunciation or intonation. A score of 3, however, shows noticeable problems with pronunciation, intonation, and speaking speed. Problems that make the listener need to concentrate in order to understand. And even though it's just a 1-point difference, the evaluation gap is actually quite large. A score of 1 is basically a participation score. It means there are major issues with pronunciation, stress, and intonation. Now let's see IELTS speaking scoring. At the highest level, a score of 9 means excellent phonological features, clear pronunciation, accurate stress, natural linking, and effective intonation. OPIC speaking uses similar criteria. The better your pronunciation and intonation, the higher your score. The more issues you have, the lower your score will be. In short, here's the key takeaway. All speaking tests evaluate not only pronunciation, but also stress, intonation, and linking, and that makes them very important for us to practice. Your native language has many phonological features too, but you never studied its sound rules formally. Instead, you absorb them naturally through endless speaking and listening. Think of it this way. A wolf boy raised hearing only wolf howls would never develop the human ability to speak. Now let's look at some fascinating scientific findings. A study from the National Center for Biotechnology Information shows that listening activates specific brain areas, and auditory information is processed step by step in the brain. Most importantly, reading depends on prior listening. Listening is fundamental. In short, listening and reading must work together. Research from Johns Hopkins University Institute also points out the ears only assist. The brain is what actually hears sound. Pretty amazing, right? What this means is that the more you speak and listen, the more your brain internalizes language, much more than your ears or mouth alone. That's why practicing listening with movies or other natural materials is very useful. But here's a tip. Search text-to-speech AI online. Whenever you review a reading passage, convert it into an audio file. That way, you practice listening and reading together far more effectively. For speaking practice, shadowing is essential. Even more important, though, is recording yourself and comparing your speech with native speakers' shadowing materials. Remember, speed is not the goal. Focus instead on the differences in pronunciation, stress, linking, and intonation. Respect your current level, stay calm, and prioritize accuracy. Let me repeat. Use your reading passages as both listening and speaking materials. By training your brain through both hearing and speaking, you'll see your reading skills improve astonishingly fast. Remember that chart we looked at earlier? Your environment changes your brain. And that's exactly why my lessons always include carefully prepared listening and speaking materials to help you progress faster, no matter your grammar or reading level. That wraps up today's lesson. If you have any questions or concerns, leave them in the comments and I'll be happy to answer. I'm rooting for all of you. See you in the next part. Thanks for watching.